Millstone, and I'm the Executive Director of Feedback. For those of you who don't know us, we are an environmental campaign group aiming to enable the regeneration of nature by reducing the demands placed on it by the food system. So just a quick reminder as to why we're in business working in this kind of food system. It's worth bearing in mind that agriculture and food production is the single activity with a great human activity with the greatest impact on the environment. It's behind 70% of deforestation and biodiversity loss. It accounts for a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. It accounts for 70% of all freshwater use. So just today, about 20 species will have become extinct due to agriculture. Michael Gove, not necessarily known for his strident environmental views himself, recently said there were maybe 30 to 40 harvests left in the UK. This is really alarming for food security. And yet, why we're all here this evening, despite these tremendous environmental impacts of food production, we know that globally 1/3 that is produced never reaches human mouths. In terms of the environmental impact of this loss, it's massive. So close to 1/3 of agricultural lands are used to grow food that is never eaten. If food was for a country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter behind China and the United States. The fresh water used to irrigate fields growing food that is never eaten could meet the domestic needs of all the Earth's 7 billion inhabitants and more. So really for me, food waste really is one of the great environmental scandals and tragedies of our time, in addition of course to being a moral outrage in a world where hunger, malnutrition and food insecurity still exist. And so, why is this happening actually? Just trying to get to the bottom of how have we ended up in a system where 1/3 of food is never eaten? So the scale of the problem suggests to me that it's not just a small issue that can be solved, but is actually an inherent feature of our current food system. There's something about our food system which leads to waste. And I, in this brief speech, would like to suggest 2 root causes that lead to the waste. The first, I would argue, is the inappropriateness of the corporation as an actor in the food system. And the second is what I call this a context of externality permissiveness. So thinking about the public corporation first, and taking it back to our experience in the UK of the supermarket, of British supermarkets. So I'm assuming you eat, and if you eat in the UK, along with probably about 98% of other British people in the UK at the moment, chances are you've been to a handful, one of 4 or 5 supermarkets in the last week. These supermarkets, what do we know about them? They're profit-making entities, they have limited liability, and most of them are listed on the stock exchange. And essentially, these features, in my analysis, drive organizations that externalize their costs and grow at all costs. And this driver of cost externalization and growth is what leads to waste in the case of food. So, in our research, for example, it leads to waste upstream in the supply chain. Why is that? The supermarkets are so concentrated, yield such significant power in the supply chain that they're in a position to dictate the terms of business with their suppliers. A well-known example of this is cosmetic specifications. That is to say, requiring apples to be of a certain size and a certain colour and a certain shape, regardless of taste, to suppliers. And what our research has shown time and time again is that this leads to a situation of overproduction, of normalised overproduction amongst suppliers to make sure they can meet these contracts and the stringent supplies, the stringent standards placed on them by the supermarkets. So we know that because of these practices, this concentration of power, this ability to externalize costs, huge amounts of waste are generated in farms across the UK, probably enough to feed the population of Manchester with its 5 a day for a year, and also huge amounts of waste are generated throughout the world in supplier countries, often affecting the livelihoods of some of the poorer producers in the world. So, why are they getting away with this? Oh, well, on the consumption side, before I move on, we also know that supermarkets have a vested interest, essentially, in keeping us over-purchasing. They won't tell us that, but they do. Obviously, the more we purchase, the higher their revenue. And we see this time and time again, that supermarkets, push their customers through over-purchase with promotions or inappropriate packaging sizes or misleading date labeling. For example, an overly cautious use of labels. And then, of course, we end up in a situation when huge amounts of waste are generated in consumers' homes across the UK, and we see the political debates in the UK focus very much on waste in the homes, ignoring the fact that most of us have been, pushed and steered towards over-purchase when we do our weekly shop in supermarkets. So, why are they getting away with this? Why is it are these kind of actors in a position to externalize costs upstream and downstream? Here we go to what I think is the second root cause of dysfunction, this context of externality permissiveness. And by this I mean, essentially, the fact that the costs, the environmental costs of food production are not borne by those that profit from it. These corporations can use land, pollute, use fresh waters, degrade the environment, and essentially create huge amounts of waste without bearing any of the costs. So recently there's been a very interesting study by the Sustainable Food Trust that suggested that for every pound spent on food in the UK, we would probably need to add an extra pound that's borne by the public in terms of environmental remediation, or indeed in terms of negative health impacts that are borne by the NHS. A slightly older study, but one that I found shocking and that really shaped my thinking on this issue, was by TrueCost. And in their analysis, TrueCost suggested that the global corporations in agribusiness working on food production, the cost to remediate their externalities of the environment would in fact be greater than the profits that they generate. That is to say that we can't have a system where some of these environmental impacts are integrated and internalized without these companies going out of business. So in my view, we really have this kind of toxic combination here of a food system dominated by companies with a vested interest to externalize costs, to grow and so forth, to maximize the value to their shareholders on the one hand, and on the other, legal frameworks that enable them to do just, to use resources with impunity. That's my analysis of the problem. So, if that is kind of the root cause of this, the situation that's meant that we've ended up with this, I guess, high input, highly polluting, highly wasteful system, it follows that to address it, we would need to just rethink both those issues. So, in my view, we need to move away from certain production techniques. And by this, I would suggest a move away from industrial systems, linear industrial systems, to more circular systems, to systems where wastes, food resources and surplus and indeed nutrients are revalorized within the food system and flow in a more circular fashion. In practice, this would mean agricultural policies supportive of food production methods and indeed diets that are less impactful on the environment. But in my opinion as well, we won't be able to move to such a system without essentially a new food economy. One that is not dominated by a handful of corporations, but one where we have a vibrant economic actors operating at different scales, with different kinds of ownership structure, with different business models, and that are generated, and that aim to generate profit other than the financial, since we know that financial profit generation necessarily subordinates environmental and social goals. To my mind, this is absolutely crucial. I do not believe that we can solve the food waste issue within the current economic system. So, by moving towards this new food economy, by rethinking agricultural production techniques and diets, I believe we could move to a system that is less wasteful, or a system that is not characterized by waste, and one that is fairer and more resilient, and ultimately that can nourish both people and planet. Thank you.